Right, I'm coming at you, Liv, with a bit of a rant today because I don't know, just had one of those weeks at work that's been just horrendous. You know, like
Oh God.
some weeks is chill, some weeks is like just so stressful.
Yeah.
Today, for me, it's been a stressful week. And
Spill the beans.
I'm gonna
Spill the beans, girl.
sound like such a cliche, but it is so hard being a woman in academia because I feel like people take us less seriously. Like we work so hard to get here, and then when we're at the top, or like we're doing a postdoc, right, and people still don't take you seriously. But
Yeah.
anyway, going back to my week and why I'm saying this, I was basically chasing someone for slides, like a collaborator for slides, for literally weeks. Like they are a collaborator, they should make information readily available. It's stuff they'd already presented. So I was like, can you share the slides because my
Yeah.
deliverables for the grant are based on that information. And had my boss asked, who is man and also obviously more senior than me, and he has
Yeah.
asked in the past, it would have taken like less than a day for him to send it over. Tell me why I'm asking 3 weeks later
Oof.
still for these slides, right?
Still
So not
nothing.
only that, that really annoyed me. So I sent in my email like respectfully, like this is the third week that I've asked, and like I really do need this information to carry on. And someone in my team basically told me that I had to watch my tone in emails.
Sorry,
Watch my
what?
tone. What does that even
What does
mean?
that even
What does
mean? Yeah,
watch
what
my
does that even
tone
mean?
mean? Because how are you inferring a tone of an email? There is no tone in an email.
There's no tone. There's no
I
tone unless you
know.
interpret a tone. Listen, even if you had a tone, I'm sorry, but after 3 weeks of asking, I think you're allowed to have a tone because clearly not having a tone has got you nowhere. So it's about time you get a tone, whatever the hell that means.
And at this point, it was like almost a month since I asked. And I think because I knew if my boss had asked,
Yeah.
then it it would have been sent in a day. So I was just like,
Not
firstly,
even like
why
your
is
boss,
that
but if it
different?
was, yeah, if it was like a male postdoc. So like I have to ask, did they say it to your face? And also, was it a man or a woman who told you?
They rang me up and we were like talking about other things, and then a man,
Okay.
dropped it in the conversation that we were
Okay,
having
yeah, of
over the phone that I
course.
need to watch my tone. And I was like, I just said okay at the time, but then I was like, there's no way that you would ever say that to a male counterpart, would
100%,
you?
like he absolutely wouldn't. It would just be put down to like, oh, you know how academics are, like academics are just blunt and like to the point. But yeah, like the minute you say it, it's like, yeah, no. Interesting that it was also a man who told you. If you were, like, I don't know, like rude in the email, but you weren't rude. So
No, not at all. Like anyone I've spoke to as well about this situation, I've showed them the emails and they were like, what? That's literally fine. Like absolutely fine. I don't know what tone there is. Like that's just normal corporate email.
yeah, they've worked with you long enough to know how you are as well.
I'm basically the only female in this like external collaboration, so it's like it's hard out here. It's hard out
Yeah.
here.
And like how tone deaf it, like you guys fix your tone because you guys are tone deaf to be saying that to women in 2025. Come on
Mm,
now, do better. Literally do better.
yeah, I know.
Sorry.
I agree.
Keep
I
keep your
agree.
tone, Taz, because some of us love it about you.
No, I'm not going to change anything about me, babe. Like,
Yeah,
do
good.
not worry. It's
Good.
just like, why am I being held accountable for my tone when a guy who's meant to send a few PowerPoint slides like a month ago isn't being accountable? Like, no.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying when I'm saying my supervisor would just be like, yeah, great, like, well done. Like, good, because you've given them enough time now. And that's like a
Yeah.
normal reaction is like, okay, you've waited long enough. Like, now's the time to be like, come on now.
But yeah,
Hashtag women
that
in
was a
STEM.
story for today. I'm sure so many women in general in the working space have stories like that anyway. I mean, let us know if you've had any experiences in that kind of thing, because sometimes it's very easy to feel like it's just you, but I've definitely had
Mm-hmm.
conversations with a lot of people in the past, and this has happened to me before, and people have told me their stories, and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's actually pretty fucked, to be honest.
Yeah, I've heard so many crazy stories. So yeah, I'm sure our listeners can definitely relate. And maybe they should send these stuff in as a laboratory. Like that's what we want to
Mm.
know. But before we get carried away and start talking about laboratory, obviously we need to get into the science of today's episode.
Mm-hmm.
But very quickly before we do that, this is the last episode of season 5. debunked. And
Oh
we
my
just want to
gosh.
say thank you guys so much for coming along for the ride that has been season 5. We've really enjoyed filming this season. It's been so fun, and we've absolutely loved reading all of your guys' message. And thank you so much to everybody who has tuned in, whether you've tuned in to just one episode or whether you've tuned in to all 8. We really appreciate having you guys here, and we've really enjoyed reading all of your messages from this season. Now, if you want to hear details about season 6, when you can expect it, what the topic might be, then make sure you stick around until the end of this episode, because we're going to be dropping the details at the end. And of course, make sure you're following us on Instagram at So Culture Podcast, and also TikTok, where we will of course drop spoilers before season 6. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. We still have this final episode. So Taz, what are we going to be talking about today?
We are going to be talking all about chemtrails, so let's get into it.
So excited.
This is Debunked by the So Culture Podcast,
hosted by Liv and Taz, 2 girls exploring the world of science and tech, unfiltered.
This season, we're separating fact from fiction as we dive into the world's most controversial conspiracy theories by seeing if science can prove or disprove them.
And of course, we are still serving up the laboraTEAAAA,
because the STEM world is messier than you think.
Don't forget, all opinions are our own, and all of our listener stories are alleged. Let's get into this week's episode of Debunked.
Have you ever looked up at the sky and noticed long white streaks left by passing planes? They seem to hang there, drifting, expanding, stretching from horizon to horizon. Some days the sky would be completely clear until the planes came, and within hours those trails thickened, forming a dull haze. And I was definitely not the only one noticing this. So I began hearing stories, people getting sick after heavy spray days, unmarked planes flying at strange hours, photos of strange grids crisscrossing the sky, and whispers about weather control, population experiments, and even mind control. Could it really all just be a coincidence, or are contrails actually chemtrails?
Interesting. I'm so excited for this episode because I don't know what it is about people I am currently following on Instagram, but they are loving the chemtrails conspiracy at the moment. Like, I'm seeing so many people sharing different reels about this. Yeah, like literally so many. I feel like it's so hot right now, but I actually really don't know a lot about it. So let's start with something that you just mentioned. So you just mentioned like contrails. Is that what you said? Contrails and chemtrails? What the hell are contrails? And like, just tell us about this conspiracy in general, because I vaguely know it, but I don't feel like I'm that clued up on it.
Okay, so let's start with the word contrails, which is just short for condensation trails, so kind of self-explanatory. And then chemtrails, which is kind of a play on this, is a fusion of chemical and trails. So to believers, they're evidence of chemical substances being deliberately sprayed into the atmosphere by planes. Believers in this conspiracy say that while normal contrails dissipate relatively quickly, contrails that linger must contain additional substances. So those who believe the theory say that the purposes of the chemical release may be biological or chemical warfare, population control, solar radiation management, weather modification, psychological manipulation, or testing of like biological or chemical agents on the population, and that the trails are essentially causing respiratory illnesses or other problems. So like a vast number of reasons behind chemtrails, apparently.
Oh my God, yeah, that is so interesting. So like that part of the theory I know about, and like even just from watching like little clips and maybe even like 5 seconds of these reels, I kind of like got that was the general vibe of like the conspiracy theory around chemtrails. But what I'm really interested in is when this conspiracy theory started. Like, did it start when planes were like first a thing, or is it only something that's kind of started recently? Because like I said, I've really noticed it like popping off recently and people getting really interested in it. So I don't know if it's just like the latest conspiracy theory that's taken over like COVID, or I don't know, how long has it been around?
I had the same question because like You would think that this conspiracy would have been around as long as planes have, but that's not actually the case. So if we take it back to 1996, a US Air Force paper titled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025, which is kind of wild because it's 2025 now. And this paper outlined future weather modification systems to achieve military objectives using aerospace forces. And for obvious reasons, this sparked imaginations. So it was clearly labeled as like speculative and not reflective of actual military policy. But obviously, conspiracy theorists latch onto it. It could be a reason why it's coming around now because it's 2025. And also, in the late 1990s, the US Air Force was accused of spraying the US population with mysterious substances from aircraft, which generated unusual contrail patterns. So it kind of like originated from this time, late 1990s. And so believers of this theory claim that after 1995, contrails had a different chemical composition that lasted a lot longer in the sky. And soon enough, whispers of shadowy government programs and population control began to take off. And by early 2000s, others popularized the idea that these streaks were more than just jet exhaust. They were poison, mind control agents, climate manipulation tools, and some even claim they spread diseases like COVID-19 or vaccines through the air. And again, I think that's kind of where the popularity of this conspiracy theory kind of began. It was very like COVID centric and it's kind of grown since then. And obviously on social media, there was like proof that, as you say, Liv, that you've seen, there was photos of barrel filled planes, videos of jets dumping fuel during emergency landings, and they have all been assumed as sinister activity. But the photos of the barreled filled planes were actually based on real life, but they used water barrels in planes to test different cargo holds and how it balances across the plane. So obviously they're not going to use real humans to test like the balance and the weight of a plane. And so they use water-filled tanks. But obviously pictures of this circulated because they were like, see, these planes full of barrels containing mysterious substances are flying. Like, yes, they absolutely are, but it's just water and it's just to test the balance of the plane. And then videos of jets like dumping fuel. There was a guy who basically filmed the wing of his aeroplane and this mysterious substance coming out. But what he failed to mention is that his plane was making an emergency landing, and in order to do that, you have to dump jet fuel out of the plane. So,
do you? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, but that was the reason why. But obviously, from like a conspiracy theorist perspective, this is all like very sinister activity.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the idea took flight, literally, pardon the pun. And actually in 2017, a study found that about 10% of Americans fully believe in chemtrails, and another 30% thought they might actually be real, which I think is quite like a lot.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it is a lot of people.
Yeah, that's like that's nearly half the population believe
that they're like open to the idea.
Yeah.
And this same review highlighted one theory that's gained like traction in conspiracy circles, and it's that clouds are being seeded with electrically conductive materials as part of some massive electromagnetic weapons program linked to HAARP, and that is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Bit of a mouthful. But now HAARP was a real scientific project. So originally designed to study the ionosphere, which is the upper layer of the atmosphere, roughly 70 to 1,000 kilometers up. It's where the atmosphere starts transitioning into space, where solar radiation like X-rays and UV rays start interacting with atmospheric particles. And now this region is packed with free electrons and ions, making it important for things like radio communication and navigation system. And so HAARP's goal was to see how energy could be transmitted through the ionosphere and whether it could be enhanced to improve long-range communication or better understand space weather. So in 2014, the program was officially shut down, but that hasn't stopped some people people from claiming that it was secretly repurposed into a kind of geoengineering or weather modification weapon, despite no credible evidence to support that.
I'm so confused. Like, so there was this thing called HARP. They were using it to basically see if it was like a better way to improve communication. Then it got shut down, and then people were like, no, actually it never got shut down. They've repurposed it as some secret weather controlling thing.
Yeah,
I have heard about this, and like I've heard about cloud seeding, especially in places like Dubai.
And
isn't this
we're
like
gonna
a
get
real
into
thing?
that.
Okay,
We're gonna get into that.
Okay, I'm excited for that.
But yeah, like scientifically speaking, while HARP could manipulate, I guess, small patches of the ionosphere temporarily, its energy output wasn't anywhere near the scale needed to create weather events or control the climate.
Yeah, that's all really interesting, but I don't know, like I feel like you've done this on all of my episodes where you're like, nah, there's literally like no real science to it. I need you to give me a bit more, Taz. Like, is there any actual science or like actual hard evidence for this theory? Because so far I'm not convinced.
Well, actually, yeah, there is. And this is what I was super surprised about when I was doing the research. So I want to first talk about the history, specifically military experimentation with chemical and biological agents.
Yes, I'm excited for this, yeah.
So between the 1940s and the late 1970s, the UK Ministry of Defence, or MOD for short, ran a whole series of secret biological trials. And a lot of them happened in public spaces without people knowing. And these were parts of an effort to understand how Britain might respond to a biological attack, especially during the Cold War. I honestly feel like they were just so terrified of the Russians, to be honest. We've spoken about them before, like in the moon landing episode, and why that might be a conspiracy theory because they were like racing against the Soviets.
Yeah, interesting.
But in this time, they weren't using actual biological weapons in most of these trials. They used what were called stimulants, and these were substances believed to be harmless but thought to behave like real pathogens in the air, making them useful for studying things like dispersal patterns. So one major example was the fluorescent particle trials, which ran from 1955 to 1963. And basically, planes flew over large areas of the UK, including the entire south and west coast, releasing large amounts of zinc cadmium sulfide. This chemical fluoresced under UV light, so scientists could track how it spread through the atmosphere, and the chemical drifted miles inland, its fluorescence allowing the spread to be monitored where it was exposed to the general population. So while the government has insisted the chemical is safe, cadmium is recognized as a cause of lung cancer, and during the Second World War was considered by the Allies as a chemical weapon. So I'm not sure where they got the idea that it was safe, because it was literally considered a weapon in the Second World War.
So like before they did this trial as well, right?
So before they did the trial, but like maybe they were using it at such low concentrations that it probably was not harmful. Anyway, another set of tests, the large area coverage trials, involve spraying bacteria like E. coli and Bacillus globigii, which is supposed to mimic anthrax, from a ship anchored off the Dorset coast. So whilst this wasn't a plane, it still demonstrates that they have released biological agents in the air. And this happened between 1961 and 1968 and reportedly exposed over 1 million people living along the south coast. And the idea was to see how a biological agent might move inland if released from the sea.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so the government later commissioned 2 scientific reviews of the safety of these trials that they did, but concluded there was no serious health risk. Although one did acknowledge that vulnerable groups like people with respiratory issues could have potentially been affected. And then when asked if they would do any more of these experiments, a spokeswoman for the MOD said, "It's not our policy to discuss ongoing research," which you could take either way. Like, it probably is, like, they can't discuss anything they do at Ministry of Defence. It's like highly classified, but like that's also not a no. So yeah. But in addition to that, and not just based in the UK, Back in 1950, the US Navy ran a biological warfare test called Operation Sea Spray, and it involved releasing bacteria over the city of San Francisco to study how vulnerable an urban population might be to a bio attack. So from September the 20th to the 27th, they sprayed 2 types of bacteria, Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii, from a ship positioned off the coast. So monitoring equipment was placed over 40 locations around the city, and based on the data collected, the Army concluded that nearly every one of San Francisco's 800,000 residents likely inhaled at least 5,000 bacterial particles, which is roughly within the infectious range for something like anthrax.
What on earth?
I know.
Like, do the people know?
Well, this is the thing. So Serratia marcescens wasn't well understood at the time, and it was thought to be mostly harmless, a good candidate for testing the spread without causing illness. But not long after the release, something unusual happened, and on October the 11th, 11 people were admitted to Stanford Hospital with serious, rare urinary tract infections. 10 recovered, but one patient, Edward J. Nevin, who had recently undergone prostate surgery, died from a heart valve infection a few weeks later. So doctors flagged it as an unusually clustered outbreak and even published a paper about it, but there was no solid link made to the military tests, and all 11 patients had undergone medical procedures, which raised the possibility that the infections came from inside the hospital rather than from the air. But still, cases of pneumonia also rose in the area after the bacterial release, though again, there was no direct connection that was ever proven. And at the time, health authorities weren't alerted about the test in advance, and then decades later, some doctors questioned whether the release could have played a role in other infections, including the heart valve cases and even intravenous drug-related infections in the 60s and 70s. And the full story didn't actually come to light until 1977, when a Senate subcommittee held hearings on the US military's past biological tests, and the Army acknowledged the San Francisco experiment and discussed the infections, but maintained it was coincidental and unrelated to their activity. Now, Edward Nevin, who passed away, his family ended up filing a lawsuit against the federal government in 1981, arguing that the test contributed to his death. And this case actually went all the way to the Supreme Court, but the justices ultimately let lower court rulings stand, which found no proof linking the test to Nevin's death and basically dismissed their claims. So while Operation Sea Spray didn't lead to any official acknowledgement of harm, it is another example from the Cold War era where the public was used, knowingly or not, in experiments designed to simulate biological warfare, all in the name of national defense research, which is kind of wild, really, because the nation you're defending, you're infecting with like anthrax, basically.
Yeah, but let's be honest, they don't actually care about like an individual few deaths, do they? Like, as long as they know they're not going to kill off the whole population, like, ultimately they don't care. And also when they're like, oh yeah, we've done like reports into this, or we've looked into this case, like, it doesn't really mean anything, because that's like my supervisor saying, Liv, I think you broke this piece of lab equipment. Can you go and investigate if you broke this piece of lab equipment?
Yeah.
And then I go and do my investigation. I'm like, I'll go back.
No, I didn't.
No, it wasn't me. Like, it doesn't really count for anything. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. This is a bit crazy. I can't lie. I can kind of see how, if you hear about these real life, like actual real life things that we know have happened, like these experiments, then you would start to believe this theory. So you can kind of see how these have almost like sowed the seeds of like distrust in like the government or whatever. And I'm kind of with them, to be honest. Like, if the government has, and we've said this before in the series, if we know that the government has done it before, then what is stopping them now? What's stopping the chemtrail theory being true?
Yeah, 100%.
But before we get into the juicy part of today's episode, I think it is about time we take a shot on this podcast. I feel like we should celebrate making it to the end of season 5, making it to the end of Debunked. It's a monumental achievement. And there's only one way to celebrate it on So Cultured, and it is to take a shot.
Liv, I know you've heard some wild stories about my nights out, but I'm about to go to work. So the only shot I'm going to be doing is this gut shot from Excite.
Hell yes. Cheers to that. Cheers, Taz.
Cheers.
Oh my God, did you do it all in one?
Yeah, I'm good at taking shots, babe.
So good. Do you know, it was actually so nice to do our shot together, like on the podcast, because me and Taz have been sending each other a video every day of us doing our shots, but Taz has fully convinced me to like join this gut microbiome hype.
Yeah, I feel like ever since working on the microbiome and its role in disease in my new postdoc, I've genuinely learned so much on how we can supplement our gut microbiota. So we've both recently been taking these chaga infused kefir gut health shots from the Excite, and not only does it have like a kefir base, which is like the probiotic in itself to maintain the bacterial diversity in your gut.
Yeah, and it's also infused with chaga, scientifically known as Inonotus obliquus. This is basically a mushroom-like fungus, and it is one of the highest natural antioxidant sources on Earth, which basically means it can protect cells from damage and also boost your immunity.
Yep, so this gut health shot is a perfect combination to start your day and support the gut-brain axis through the effects of beneficial bacteria from the kefir and also anti-inflammatory activity of chaga, which also impacts mood, focus, and overall well-being. And unlike caffeine, chaga provides a slow-release energy boost without overstimulating your nervous system. So it's giving the new matcha.
Yeah, you sold me. You sold me with that.
Yeah, and if you're curious, Excite has more adaptogenic blends like the Lion's Mane shot for focus or the reishi for calming vibes and deep sleep. And I love the reishi one. I fully support the fact that it helps your sleep.
Yeah, that one is so good. So if you guys want to start something new to improve your gut microbiome and your energy in the morning, then give the Excite shots a try because we absolutely love them. But just make sure that you stick with it for like 2 to 3 weeks and you should definitely see a notable difference in energy and also gut health. And if you love it, you can subscribe for a whole year and save £50.
But with that, let's get back into the episode.
Okay. So Taz, we've spoken a lot about biological warfare, and obviously we earlier on in the episode touched on weather modification. So I want to get to that. Is there any basis for that or any scientific basis for that?
Yeah, I'm actually so glad you asked because yes, there is. And I was so surprised about this. So there's actually 2 types that I've come across, and these types are rooted in fact. So the first is cloud seeding, which you mentioned earlier. And if you asked me about this before I did the research, I would have said like, surely it's a complete conspiracy and not possible. But it is still debated on whether this actually works, but the idea of it is based on science. So the idea is pretty straightforward. You try to change the amount of precipitation, so like making it rain more, snow more, or breaking up fog and hail, usually to benefit agriculture, water supply, or to clear the skies for major events. So the way that it works is by dispersing particles into the clouds to try and encourage raindrop or snowflake formation. So these particles act as nuclei that the moisture can condense around, and common materials include silver iodide, potassium iodide, or dry ice. But more recently, materials like sodium chloride, so your standard table salt, have been recognized and increasingly used for its ability to attract water. So there are a couple of different techniques to do this. So you've got static seeding, which aims to increase precipitation by encouraging ice crystals to form in supercooled clouds, while you've also got dynamic seeding, which tries to boost cloud updrafts by releasing latent heat, which may make storms more intense and also increase rainfall. So seeding agents can be released from aircraft or from ground-based generators, or even newer methods like drones emitting electric charges or infrared lasers to stimulate this condensation. Now, as for whether cloud seeding actually works, the science is divided. So there's been decades of studies with mixed results. So some researchers say it can bump up precipitation by a few percent under the right conditions, especially in mountainous areas with supercooled clouds. For example, the Wyoming Weather Modification Study, which suggested that cloud seeding could increase seasonal snowpack by up to 3%. So like more snowfall essentially.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, there's major reviews like the one by the US National Academy of Sciences. It couldn't find statistically significant evidence of consistent success. And in fact, they noted that while our understanding of weather systems has improved, it's still hard to prove that cloud seeding makes a reliable difference. And a Tel Aviv University study in 2010 reached a similar conclusion that traditional seeding methods might have little effect. And some studies suggest that planes might unintentionally seed clouds just by the way that the air moves around their wings or engines. Still, some scientists are optimistic, and one of them, Jeff Tilley from the Desert Research Institute, claimed that in 2016 the newer technologies are delivering more dependable results. And the American Meteorological Society has acknowledged that seeding can seasonally boost precipitation by about 10% in certain mountain environments. And because of this mixed record, cloud seeding has sometimes been used in really specific contexts. So during the 2008 Beijing Olympics, China reportedly used it to try and clear the skies ahead of the opening and closing ceremonies. But whether the attempt worked is still debated. Now, what about the safety and the environmental impact? So the main concern has been around the silver iodide, but studies suggest that environmental and health risks are minimal, and this is mostly because the concentrations used are really small, much less than what industries release into the environment anyway, and even less than what is found in things like dental fillings. So detailed studies in places like California's Sierra Nevada and in Australia have found that levels of silver in the soil, water, and vegetation remained below natural background levels. So even with the uncertainty, cloud seeding continues to be used around the world, seen by some as a useful tool and by others as an area where the science still kind of needs to catch up with the ambitions.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, like I said at the start, I've heard about cloud seeding like mainly in relation to Dubai, and I'm so dumb that I don't even know why specifically it's used in Dubai. But I'm pretty sure it's like pretty common, and I definitely have heard that that's the reason that Dubai have like such crazy storms, because it's all to do with cloud seeding. So yeah, I don't know. That's really
I think
interesting.
that's a bit more of like a conspiracy, because like all the evidence points towards the fact that it only increases rainfall by like a couple of percent. And also the conditions required for cloud seeding to work are basically you have like really super cooled clouds. Basically, you're expecting rainfall anyway, and you kind of just give it a push. Whereas in Dubai, I'm a little bit skeptical as to how effective it actually is, because they don't actually have the conditions that I've spoken about for cloud seeding to actually work, because they have like very like humid, hot climate, whereas the conditions where it actually works is like super cooled mountainous areas. And it's also controversial as to how big of an effect it would have, because a lot of the times it's a very minimal effect. It's like a couple percent extra on precipitation, whereas what we see in the media is like, oh, it caused these crazy huge floods. So realistically, that's probably climate change, babe.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, because I've definitely heard that narrative of like cloud seeding causes these huge floods in Dubai. So yeah, that's really interesting to hear. But okay, so that's the first like weather modification system. But what was the second one?
Yeah, so the second is called solar radiation modification, or SRM for short. And it sounds like something plucked straight out of science fiction, but it's very real and actually very serious. So it's this big controversial idea in climate science that involves reflecting sunlight away from Earth to reduce global warming. Now, before you like start picturing giant mirrors in space, which is, fun fact, actually one of the proposed ideas, the methods being looked at are happening on Earth, or rather our atmosphere, not in space. So the leading candidate in the SRM toolbox is called stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI. And this approach is inspired by nature, specifically volcanic eruption. So when big volcanoes erupt, they shoot particles like sulfur into the stratosphere, and these aerosols reflect sunlight and temporarily cool the planet. So the idea behind SAI is to mimic this by deliberately releasing tiny reflective particles, think sulfates or calcium carbonate, into the upper atmosphere using an aircraft. So the cooling effect would then kick in pretty fast within a few months. And another idea is marine cloud brightening. So this involves spraying fine sea salt particles into marine clouds to make them whiter and more reflective. And it sounds simple, but they're hard to model and even harder to manipulate on a large scale. Still though, it could be used in like really specific regions. So have been a few examples on where this has taken place. So the University of Washington is trying to brighten clouds by spraying solutions of water and salt from the deck of an old aircraft carrier into the atmosphere. And Australia is a world leader in trialling local climate interventions, including small-scale trials of cloud brightening above the Great Barrier Reef. So SRM isn't necessarily about fancy physics, but it comes with like a heavy dose of what if. So it's obviously not like hitting a reset button on global warming. Plus, it wouldn't deal with other issues tied to the high CO2 levels like ocean acidification. So ultimately, the SRM could help cool the planet, but it's not like the best option ever. It's like complex, controversial, risky set of ideas that we don't really know the full impact of right now. And whilst there's been tests to do this, it's obviously not at all commonplace. So not really a basis for chemtrails.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's kind of interesting to hear something that's related to chemtrails, but is also potentially something that could, in a way, maybe be used for good, I guess. But I don't know, ever since you mentioned the space mirrors, I can't lie, I kind of want to know more about them, because as soon as you said it, I pictured like mirrors in space. So like, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, is that actually a thing?
Yeah, no, it's a thing. They've basically been proposed placing like reflective materials in orbit essentially to block a fraction of sunlight. But obviously they're kind of like a sci-fi version of SRM. So they're super expensive, logistically kind of insane to think about doing that. And obviously not likely to happen anytime soon. But I think it's funny that they thought about doing that.
Okay, so bottom line is, if I'm just going to like summarize everything we've spoke about, we know that the government do some shady shit. We know that they've done some weird experiments using biological warfare, I guess, or I don't know, like kind of dipping their toes in that. We also know that they have weather control systems that potentially do work or don't work. I can kind of see how the evidence for, or like all of this collectively in some way supports the chemtrail theories, I guess. Yeah. But I feel like we need a little bit more like scientific explanation for chemtrails themselves, or I guess, I don't know, like contrails. So yeah, let's talk about what actually are chemtrails, and do we know much about how they might form?
Yeah, I think that's really important what you say, because we say this every episode, right? The conspiracy theories that we talk about, they either do have some sort of a basis for like where they came about, or they don't at all. Like flat earth theory, for example, is one where we literally couldn't find any scientific basis for that. And it was more kind of like where the rumors kind of began, and that was it. But things like the moon landing and the lab leak theory, it was kind of like rooted in the science, and then we picked it apart. So I feel like historically things have been released from planes, right? But it just doesn't mean that it's like commonplace now. And like the planes that you see in the sky that are releasing like long trails behind them, it's not a chemtrail, it's a contrail. So here's what's actually happening. So when a jet engine burns fuel, it produces exhaust, which is a mix of water vapor, carbon dioxide, and tiny particles like soot. And at high altitudes where planes cruise, typically between 25,000 and 40,000 feet, the air is really cold, like below freezing. So when the hot, moist exhaust hits the freezing ambient air, the water vapor condenses and freezes almost instantly, forming tiny crystals. And that is what causes a contrail to form. But whether the contrail sticks around or vanishes quickly has everything to do with the humidity in the upper atmosphere. So if the air is dry, those ice crystals sublimate, which basically means they go straight from solid to gas, and poof, the trail basically disappears really quickly. There's no long white streak. But if the air up there is humid, especially when it's super saturated with respect to ice, then those ice crystals are going to hang around and even potentially grow. And the contrail can persist for minutes or even hours, and it often spreads out into a sheet of cirrus clouds, which are those high altitude wispy hair-like clouds that we often see streaking across the sky. Now, why do some planes leave contrails whilst others don't? It's not a conspiracy, it's literally just the weather. So two jets flying at slightly different altitudes, or even just a few minutes apart, can be flying through totally different air masses with different humidity levels. So one makes long lingering contrails whilst the other nothing at all. And here's a neat little fact. When the plane's exhaust passes over the rear stabilizer, which is like a small wing-like structure at the tail, something interesting happens. So the airflow becomes turbulent and the exhaust expands and cools really rapidly. And that sudden drop in temperature helps form even more ice crystals, often making it look like the plane is spraying a cloud out from the back. But no, it is just physics, I'm afraid to say. But contrails can also spread out vertically and horizontally. So the vertical spreading comes from different sized ice crystals falling at different rates. And then horizontally is all about wind shear. So basically the differences in wind speed at different altitudes. And that stretches the contrail out across the sky. And when you have lots of air traffic in humid conditions, those streaks can merge into really wide layered sheets of cloud, and then essentially making the sky look fully overcast. So those persistent trails that you see, they're not chemtrails, they're not full of mysterious chemicals raining down on us. And experts like Met Office meteorologist Aidan McGivern point out these ice crystals form way too high, often like 10 to 12 kilometers up, which is way too high for anything to realistically reach the ground in any meaningful way. Essentially, if you were to like release a chemical that high, it would just pollute the entire cloud space and like a huge area, and not necessarily even reach the ground.
That's so interesting. I feel like I've always been so curious about what those trails actually are. I mean, my mind has never really gone to conspiracy theory land and like started to think that it's just like them spraying something. I'm always just assumed it was something to do with like the like jet fuel or something like that. I don't know, but that is really, really interesting. But I'm just gonna play devil's advocate. So at the end of every single episode, obviously we always talk about, you know, our thoughts on the episode. And don't hate me, Taz. But I kind of feel like, so whilst I do fully believe that is the science behind contrails, maybe it could also be the perfect cover up for the government, because they're like, okay, we have the physics, we know that contrails exist. Maybe they could, you know, dish a few chemicals in there, just saying. But then obviously we have the issue of, you're saying that it's too high. Like if you put any kind of chemicals in there, then it would be too high up for it to even reach the ground. I don't know, so maybe not.
Yeah, I just feel like it's not happening every day. Like when you're looking up and you're seeing, I don't know, British Airways fly over and there's like a cloud forming out the back, a conspiracy theorist would say, oh, they're dropping stuff on us, that's why there's even a trail in the sky. I don't believe that at all. Like that's rooted in physics, and as what I explained, that's why it forms.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that the government aren't at all releasing anything into the atmosphere.
Look, I'm going to finish this by saying, like, I think the government have done shady shit. Am I ruling it out completely, the idea of chemtrails? No. But do I think there's enough evidence for it right now? No. That's where I stand. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, I feel they're definitely doing things up in the atmosphere in terms of weather modification, testing, but it's absolutely not commonplace, you know? Like I say, your standard British Airways flight is not dropping over the country. Do you know what I mean? like there is real rooted physics to say there's a reason why contrails are forming behind that aircraft. So I feel like, yeah, I can see both sides, but ultimately people are making it out like it's more commonplace.
This was so interesting, and this has been an episode that I've been so excited for and that we had so many requests for. So I think that's why we decided to end with this one, because we know so many of you guys were anticipating this episode. So we hope you enjoyed it. And as always, even though the season has come to an end, we will of course still be popping that poll on our Instagram story. So make sure you come over there if you want to take part, because we want to know what you guys think of this whole conspiracy around chemtrails. So thank you so much, Taz. But for now, I think it's time to get into our final laboratory of the season. So let's go. Okay, so for today's laboratory, the tagline says, "A crazy guy in my lab offered me drugs."
Okay.
These get crazier and crazier. So it says, "Hey, I hope you are doing well. We hope you're doing well as well." So it's not really one story, but a bunch of them about one guy in the same lab as me, in brackets, but has a different PI. That was known to be annoying and was absolutely hated by his PI. Once he offered me some drugs. It was a prescribed drug and he knew that it was addictive. I, of course, refused.
That's so random.
I want to know what drug was it? Prescribed drug that's addictive.
And why did he offer it?
Maybe he needs a bit of extra dollar, you know? He's trying to get her addicted. I'm not even laughing about that, because like that could genuinely seriously be what he's trying to do.
Yeah, but like what was his like case behind it? Like
I
take
don't
this
know.
drug. Like, no, I'm alright, thanks, mate. Like what was
Or
he
maybe
trying
he
to
was doing
convince?
it and then he wanted someone else to be doing it with him. Like, again, more context. I need more context, because what did he offer it to you in the lab, or was you out like on a lab evening out and he offered it to you then? Like, where's the context here? Was it in the middle of a seminar? Like,
yeah, because rogue, if it was in the lab, that's a bit weird.
Yeah. Anyway, there's more. So it says he also allowed undergraduate students doing an experiment with BR2, which is bromine, really dangerous, forbidden to students because it is deadly and needs special care. And some students almost died. They did not know that it was dangerous, and there was some fumes in the lab after that. So I personally didn't know about bromine, so I did a little bit of research into bromine for this particular laboratory. So let me just read what I found. So bromine apparently is a highly reactive and corrosive halogen element that exists as a reddish brown liquid at room temperature, which emits toxic fumes when it evaporates. And apparently it's commonly used in chemical reactions, but it's extremely hazardous in like a lab setting. It can also cause severe burns to the skin and eyes upon contact, and inhalation of its fumes can lead to respiratory irritation, coughing, and even long-term damage to the lungs. And in high concentrations, apparently bromine exposure can lead to even more serious effects, including chemical pneumonia or pulmonary edema.
Oh gosh, so he's just like fumigating these poor students.
Yeah, because apparently like it requires, I mean, and as the listener says, it requires special handling. So it says improper use, especially by untrained individuals, aka undergraduates, can result in serious injuries or even fatalities. And that's just mad. Like, this guy already is sounding like a bit of a psycho, because he's trying to get you hooked on prescription drugs, and he's putting undergraduate students' lives at risk. Like, it's I don't know, odd.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he took too many of those prescription drugs, to be honest.
Maybe. But do you know what this is kind of reminding me of? So I've told you guys a few stories about when I used to work at the zoo, and like working at the zoo was a mad time in my life. But there was a guy who used to work at the zoo, and genuinely, like, this isn't even like funny, this was like scary, but he seemed okay. Like, I had several conversations with him. He seemed okay. Like, he was nice enough, nothing, you know, off about him. But I heard that he used to basically collect like the wasps and the bees that were like dead, and he would take the stinger out and like sting himself with them. And I'm just like, it's giving that, do you know what I mean? Like weird, like, I don't know, like odd.
Sorry, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
I don't really know how that's related to this, to be honest with you, but it just came to mind. But anyway, let me continue the story because there's more. So one of the last stories about him was when he was writing his manuscript. So he was in the French Riviera and he needed an NMR spectra of a product. Instead of asking people to take the product and do the analysis, he asked a retailer to make 250 grams of this product and run a spectra to add to his manuscript and say that it was his. So he was about to pay $15,000 and lie on his manuscript, which made his PI really mad. There are so many stories about him, but I thought it would be too long to write it here. First of all, let me just say, no email is ever too long. Give us all the details you want to, because we need all the juicy gossip. But I'm gonna just say, this guy, so where is a PhD student getting $15,000 from? This brings me back to my original point. Is he a drug dealer? For real?
Yeah, that would actually make sense if he was a drug dealer, because then he would have like a lot of money to then spend 15 grand on his project. Like, makes sense.
Yeah, and I can't lie, I just can't ever imagine being that committed to my project though.
Well, it's almost not committed, because he's literally in the French Riviera is like, oh, you know what, I'll just pay 15k just to get my manuscript published whilst I like holiday it out. Again, maybe this guy is a drug dealer because he's literally in the French Riviera. Would be nice.
I think there's a really high chance he's a drug dealer, and I mean deadly serious. Or like there's something going on behind the scenes for sure. But then why is he trying to kill the undergraduates? Like, I am so sorry. As a postgrad and like a master's or a PhD student, I'm not gonna lie, like undergraduates can be a little bit annoying. Like, I'm just gonna come out and say it. They can be a bit annoying, because you either get undergraduates who are so passionate and like it's so amazing to work with them, or you get undergraduates who are just there because they have to be there and like they genuinely make your life hell, because they ignore you the whole time and then right before the submission they are like up your ass and they want all of your attention, and it's really annoying. But I can't imagine trying to kill them. I'm not saying he was trying to kill them, okay, but I'm just saying like...
But also, like she said, some of them almost died. Like, we need more information on that. Like, they obviously went to hospital. I hope they're okay. Have they recovered?
Yeah, like what actually happened? I think, to me, it sounds like overall he's very like negligent and doesn't really care enough. So like, I don't know if he was necessarily, I mean, I might be wrong because again, we don't have all the context, but for me, from the information that I have, it sounds like he wasn't necessarily trying to hurt them, but he's just so nonchalant about everything that he does. Like, oh, okay, I need this NMR spectra done, like let me just pay to get it done. Oh, I've got to show these undergraduates how to do this experiment with bromine. I can't be asked to show them properly. It is what it is. If they die, they die. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, you spoke about the guy from your zoo who did that weird stuff with the bees and wasps, but do you work with anyone who you would say is maybe equally as careless as this guy?
I think I was that person in the lab, but like totally unintentionally. Like, I couldn't even connect like the hose to the tap without like soaking everyone in the lab. Like, it was just... I was like, I gotta get out of here. Like, I don't belong in this lab. It's not the place for me.
You know, when you melt agar in the lab, you usually do it in a microwave, right? You put agar powder and you put it in the microwave and then you like spin it around. But sometimes it's at boiling temperature, but it hasn't boiled. So then when you spin it around, it can like literally like explode out the top.
Oh my God.
The amount of times where I did that and I like could have been blinded. And also another thing about running gels is that I didn't realize that some of the dyes that they use to dye the DNA so that you can visualize it, you can visualize the bands, is, I mean, obviously it makes sense now because it literally binds DNA, but like I didn't realize that was toxic and like alters your DNA. What? So I was just like, meh, with these dangerous chemicals.
I didn't know that either. I mean, like you say, it does kind of make sense, but maybe they just assume we're clever enough to figure it out. And like, maybe that's what he was doing with the students. Like, okay, you're clever enough to work out that like bromine is dangerous, but
yeah.
I mean, moral of the story is don't assume that people can work these things out, because clearly we cannot.
Yeah, clearly not. Oh my God, this one time, I don't know, maybe I should just never run a gel, to be honest. But this one time, the camera that takes a picture of the gel was broken, so I just had to look over it on one of those like UV lights. You just put the gel on a UV light. And this one time I completely forgot that you obviously have to put glasses on that stop the UV from passing through. I just had my normal like lab goggles on, and I fucking probably burnt my retina.
Oh
And
my God.
damaged my. I mean, my eyesight.
That's why you can't see me
anyway,
right now.
But...
Can you see how many fingers I'm holding up?
Yeah, 10 just.
No.
Oh.
9. You said that so confidently, like, yeah, 10. It's 9.
You have got a small thumb though, so.
Oh, listen, Megan Fox has these thumbs, which means they are hot.
Oh my God. Yeah, well, there we go.
Yeah, I mean,
ruined
that is probably why you can't see, babe. Like, you literally are blinded because
maybe she was talking about me. Although I'm not a drug dealer, I can confirm.
But yeah, I mean, this guy sounds like crazy, and if he's like nearing the point where he's like submitting a manuscript, then hopefully he's leaving the lab soon, or you're leaving the lab soon. But I mean, you've just got to look at this. This is just like going to be one of those funny stories when someone asks you like your PhD, then you're just going to tell them about this crazy guy who was just doing all this like random stuff. But I would steer clear of him if I were you. And I'm glad, obviously, that you did not accept the addictive prescription drugs. Good for you.
Yeah, well done.
Because, you know, doing a PhD can be hard. So
it can be so
I'm glad.
hard. Yeah, being academia is hard.
It is. But we don't need to turn to prescription drugs, no matter who is trying to convince us that we should. But yeah, this was interesting. And for all of our other listeners, if you guys have anything that you want to share with us, whether it's just some random story, whether you need advice, or whether you just want to ask us something, you can use the anonymous link in today's episode description. But for now, this rounds up the whole of series 5. Debunked. I was about to say series 8 then. Girl, you are not on series 8. You are on series 5. So I'm just so sad that this season has come to an end. But we hope you guys have enjoyed this season as much as we have enjoyed filming it for you guys.
So we should be back sometime in June for season 6, which is so crazy. Like, we have been doing this for over a year now, and we've just like honestly loved it more and more and more. Every single season we say this is the best one yet. So I don't know how we're going to top it, but we will top it in
we say this every season. We're like, are we going to top it? Are we going to top it? Me and Taz have been bouncing some ideas for season 6 about what we think the theme is going to be. I think we have a good idea. However, we are always open to hearing your guys' suggestion. If there's anything that you think would make an amazing series, or anything that you really want to hear from us, even if it's that you want to hear about a particular topic, definitely reach out and let us know, because it might fit in coincidentally very well with season 6. So always feel free to reach out to us with ideas for seasons, or ideas for just episodes, or things that you want to learn about, because we are always looking to broaden our horizon and dive into topics that we haven't dived into before. So definitely reach out, and just such a big thank you to you guys for listening and sticking with us for season 5. And yeah, make sure that you're following us on our socials. So you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at So Cultured Podcast. We're going to be sharing some fun content in between seasons, and of course we will update you guys and give you spoilers as to what season 6 is going to be on our Instagram and our TikTok, so make sure you are following us there. And a last thing is, you can also follow me and Taz also on our Instagrams at taz.phd and agenomics phd if you just want to stay up to date with both of us as well. But for now, we will see you guys sometime in June, and thank you so much for joining us for Debunked. We love you guys. Bye everyone.
We love you guys. Bye.